My girlfriend's mother is a longtime drug user and has been in and out of jail for my girlfriend's whole life. When she lived with her mother and her mother's husband, she witnessed physical abuse and drug activity. She was forced to move out at a very young age in order to stay alive. She thought her mother was finally clean when her mother announced her pregnancy. After getting over the initial shock, my girlfriend decided to be supportive of her mother since she thought she was clean. That was until her mother overdosed while pregnant. She decided to cut all contact at that point. My girlfriend is also a mandated reporter, and last year reported her mother and her mother's husband to the state since she knew it wasn't a safe situation for the baby. The baby died in their house, not even a month after birth, due to an overdose with signs of physical abuse. My girlfriend's mother was arrested for the murder of her baby, and other charges her husband was also arrested very recently. At first, the judge did not grant either of them bail. Eventually, her husband was granted bail, which he posted. We did not know this until recently, which helped us put some of the pieces together. My girlfriend and I like to sit outside her house in the car and just chat or listen to music. Recently, there have been black cars around my girlfriend's house. She also is frequently followed by black cars when she drives me home. It's the same couple of black cars that do this. They're not just random ones. At first, we thought we were just paranoid since everyone was still in jail. But when we found out that the husband was out of jail, we began to doubt our insanity. The first major thing happened after my girlfriend and I went on a dinner date. We got home after dark and sat in her car for about 45 minutes before we noticed the same black car passing by us every few minutes. After 10 minutes of that, a different car drove towards us, flicking its high beams on when it got close enough for us to see who was inside. It swerved into the oncoming lane, and I genuinely thought it was going to hit the passenger side of the car. It sped away and we ran inside. After that, we started noticing the black cars more and more. This past Wednesday morning, around 3 a.m.-ish, the same distinct black van that we had been seeing pulled up outside of my house. This was weird because my girlfriend and I live about 30 minutes from each other in 2 separate cities. A man got out of the van and shined a flashlight through my yard, scanning it almost. He shined the flashlight up at the window I was sitting at, kept it there for a second, then walked 30 feet to an empty driveway, and scanned around there for 20 seconds before getting in the van and peeling away. The windows were ice-covered and frozen, so I couldn't make out the specifics of the van, but it was strange. A few nights later, my girlfriend and I spent some time hanging out in the car when we spotted a black van hiding behind another parked car further up the street. We could only see one headlight, but it crept by us as we sat in the car. My girlfriend lives between 2 dead-end streets. Think of a very blocky U. She lives between the 2 prongs. The van went up the first dead end, 4 ways on, and sat for a few minutes before turning around and driving almost into the other lane of traffic to get close to us. It then went up the other dead end and stayed put. We thought it was weird that the van didn't just back out of the first dead end, instead opting to drive all the way up the narrow street and turn around. After a few minutes, we call a friend and recount the story just to get an extra opinion. While my girlfriend was talking to our friend, I got out of the car to go for a cigarette and to see how far away the van was. I walked up the dead end that the van was on for about 15 feet before getting the worst gut feeling I've ever gotten. Across the street from me was a black mass, which was darker than the darkness around it. I decided to just turn around and rush my girlfriend into the house. Later that night, we heard a bang coming from downstairs, followed by what sounded like a boot on wooden stairs. We locked the bedroom door, and I sat against the door with a baseball bat, hopeful to barricade it. A few minutes later, we heard a car door slam before the sound of tires squeezing and a car driving away. Our initial idea was maybe it came from the TV, but we had paused it, and the TV in the next room was never loud enough to feel real. When I went downstairs an hour later to get water, there was nothing damaged or missing. We theorized that maybe it was the sound of the front door trying to be opened, even though it was deadbolted. My girlfriend's exterior wall doesn't face the road, and we've never heard car sounds before. It is, however, next to a private driveway, and sometimes we'll hear her grandparents' car door close, or the neighbors backing out. The next day, I was shoveling the sidewalks at my girlfriend's house, an activity that took about 20 minutes, and I saw the same black Chevy Silverado with mud streaks on the tailgate. It circled the block about 4 times. I was able to see the silhouette of the man driving through the passenger side window, and each time, it was the same man and same truck. My girlfriend lives in a small town, and we were able to catalog the neighborhood cars. The black van and truck are abnormal. Our theory is that someone is trying to scare my girlfriend into not testifying, or flat out making sure neither of us ever have the ability to testify. We really just need more opinions. Are we just paranoid? Or is this something we should actually be worried about? Do you think these are just weird coincidences? This happened a few years ago, around mid-November. My mother and I love being outside and going for walks. This night in particular was freezing, but we decided we wanted to go out for a quick walk. As we walked back home, we went down this one street that we use all the time. It's a neighborhood street that leads to the main street, and then back into our neighborhood. We get halfway down the street when I hear a dog bark over the music on my phone. I turn it off and turn to look for the dog, because I love dogs, and I wasn't aware there was a big dog on the street. Context. I know quite a few people on this street, and I know which houses have dogs. Most of the people on the block have small dogs or cats. This came from a house that didn't have a dog, let alone a big dog. I spun around and saw a big dark mass just feet from me. If he stepped 2 more feet, he would have been able to grab me. I immediately felt weird and started speed walking back to my mom, who at that point didn't realize I stopped. I turned off my phone and whispered to her that I thought we were being followed. She turned around, grabbed my arm, and told me there were 2 men right behind us. We started walking in a zigzag pattern, and sure enough, they followed our every step. Once they caught on that, we knew one of the dudes started to make small chit-chat with us. Awfully late for y'all to be walking, huh? I swear his voice sounded like the definition of the sirens' voices, luring sailors to their doom. He continued asking questions to us. My mom kept walking and replying with quick replies. From the sound of his voice, I knew we were in danger, so I went to dial 911. Instead, my mom told me to call my dad as he would be able to get to us quicker because we were almost home. We got to the busy street and looked behind us to see them speed walking to us. We decided to risk and ran into the middle of the street as cars passed on either side of us. We ran across again and met my dad on that side. We looked across the street and both men were gone. We got into the car and searched the streets, but these guys disappeared into what seemed like thin air. I asked my mom if we would have been kidnapped if I hadn't heard the dog, and she asked me what dog. I asked her how she didn't hear this massive dog bark, especially with how good her hearing was. I still have no clue what it was I heard, but I do know it most likely saved my life. Over 4 years ago, I went to work at a warehouse in the small town that I'm from. I decided to leave after my health started to get worse physically, and I was diagnosed with panic disorder and severe anxiety after the situation that I'm about to tell you. This changed the way that I developed friendships after that job. That's for certain. So, I started this job on April Fool's Day of 2018, which was odd to me, and I had no kind of high expectations of the job. All I wanted was to do my job, get paid, and go home as I had 2 children at home, and many things that I could work on there. The job wasn't hard, and it made pretty good money for all duties considered, so I really couldn't complain. I worked the second shift for about 5 months, and I went to day shift. While working on second shift, I kept to myself mostly until one day I met someone from one of the lines after we struck up a conversation about gaming. For the sake of anonymity, we'll name him JF. Well, JF was a pretty good guy, and we had a lot of things in common. I went home that night, and he popped up as a suggested friend on Facebook. Again, another oddity. So, I decided to add him. When I did, we started talking more at work, until he suggested that we should hang out. So we did hang out. Pretty frequently. We were friends for a month at this point, and one day he decided that he was going to introduce me to his partner. She seemed decent at first, super nice, and didn't seem to be a judgmental type, so I was cool with her. From then on, I would hang out with him when my kids were spending time with my mother. One time, we were talking at a restaurant, and he started to vent to me. Dude, she's such a bitch sometimes. The other day, I forgot to take the trash out, and she threatened to stab me if I didn't. I've never been in a relationship where someone's threatened me, but she's got good intentions, dude. When he said that to me, I was concerned, but, of course, we had only been friends for a month. So, I thought that maybe he was being morbid jokingly so. I chuckled at him. He gave me a pretty serious look and said, "I'm not joking. She really did." That concerned me. Fast forward about 8 months. They're still together, and we all hang out pretty regularly, forgetting the things he told me then. One day, we were all talking, and he seemed a little off that day, so I asked him what was wrong in front of her. He flashed a smirk and said, "Nothing, dude. I'm just a little tired." He didn't have his eyes on me, though. He had them on her when I asked that. When we went to work the next day, I asked him again, "Do you promise to keep this between us?" "Of course," I agreed. He said that he was breaking up with her, and she went a little crazy. He said that she grabbed her gun and pointed it at him and said, "If I can't have you then, no one will." He said that he diffused the situation and is trying to look for a way out. Not really knowing what to say, I just said, "You'll figure it out, man." If you need somewhere to go then, you can come stay with me until you get her out of the house. Fast forward to another year. He finally decided to leave her. When he did, she flipped out again. This time, he told her over text. She said that she was going to find him and kill him, and he was actually out of work that day with a vacation day. He sent me a text that said, "Hey, let me know if she comes over to work looking for me." That struck me as odd, because I had no idea of the situation that was unfolding. She actually did come to our job, and she asked me where he was, and I said, "I have no idea. I thought he was with you, and you guys went out of town or something." All she did was roll up her window and drive off. I called him and told him that she came by, and he called the police about it. They had found her up the road with a loaded gun in the car. 2 months later, he decided to talk to her again, and when he did, he had something to tell me. When he called me, he asked if I had seen her around, and I hadn't. He said, "I would take some vacation days if I were you." Dumbfounded, I asked him why. He said to me, "Because she's out of jail, and her cousins are in town trying to find the people she has personal vendettas with. You're one of them." At that point, I was terrified. I grabbed my kids and went out of town. Took 2 weeks off of work. Come to find out, that next day, her and her cousins went to the next town over and shot 3 people in an apartment and killed them. I got the news about it the day after it happened. The reason why he knew they were coming after me is because they made a Facebook Messenger group that he was included in and sent a list of names. Everyone regarded it as spam and decided to disregard the message, but he knew what it was. 3 of the names on that list were the people that they shot. The 4th name on that list was mine. After they found the evidence, and he decided to go public about the group and screenshots that he had, they were all charged with first-degree murder. From then on, I was very careful about who I would stick my neck out for, because even though he knew the context of that list and her intentions, he decided to not inform anyone else on it. Needless to say, we aren't friends anymore, and I dodged a bullet. Literally, stay safe, y'all. I said goodbye to the last waitress, and I was on my own with my cook. Everything was pretty slow and normal until I got a call about one of the specialty items on the limited time menu we had. The food couldn't be ordered as takeout, and the lady over the phone really didn't take it well. After a little debating, she finally decided to sit in and eat instead. I'd say around 10. 20 minutes later is when I spotted an older-looking car pull up, and 3 people came out. 2 men and a woman who looked to be in their 30 S40S. I could tell it was the same lady I spoke to over the phone, judging by her attitude coming in. I further confirmed it by asking, since I already had a pretty good idea of what she wanted to eat. What I thought was an act of mild embarrassment and pettiness was actually something much more sinister later on. Her attitude toward me changed when she saw me. She was much nicer and more cooperative. This didn't ring any bells at first, because it was something that most people who wanted to look good in front of others would do. I sat them at a booth and took their orders. I noticed they had a red binder and a black pen. Remember this. I then went to tend to my other customers, as there were a couple of other tables I was waiting on. Once I brought their food out to them, they asked me if I knew any realtors. I found this to be normal, as this being the tourist vacation state it is, it wasn't uncommon for outsiders to be looking for getaway homes. I would say this was reasonable for me to assume it was nothing if they didn't already look like the unsavory type of people, if you get what I mean. Nonetheless, I gave them the phone number to a realtor I knew closely and well, since I often went to church with her. There weren't any other notable interactions I really had aside from occasional small talk, if I wasn't doing anything or refilling their drinks. It was around 4:30 p.m. now, and they were the last of my tables to leave the restaurant. If any of you were in the food industry, you know that as a server, you don't really get breaks. Just a lunch most of the time, and sometimes not even that if it's super busy all day. So my cook and I took this as an opportunity to take a well-deserved break. We walked out behind them and had a small chat with them. I should mention by now that the front of the restaurant had a disabled ramp coming up to the doors. It was long because the building was on a raised foundation. This is important. Now, I didn't really notice it at the time, but one of the men took my cook to the other side of the ramp, down near the end, and was chatting with him over a cigarette. I was behind the railing at the top of the platform where the ramp plateaued. Luckily, the other man and the woman were on the other side of the railing about 5 feet below, but in front of me. We were having some small talk, and they started to ask some personal questions, such as if I lived in the area, if I smoked weed, how old I was, etc. I hadn't quite learned yet that telling strangers such personal things wasn't a good idea. However, this, for some reason, was starting to raise some red flags. I gave very vague answers to all her questions as best as I could. Unfortunately, they still persisted in trying to have some sort of communication with me outside of my work, whether or not I said no. I suppose when they finally realized that I wasn't going to give that information up, the woman finally got to her point. She had told me that she had a business offer for me. It was for a cleaning service. I don't like cleaning anyway, so regardless, I would have said no, however. What she said next solidified my answer. She proceeded to tell me that she owned a maid service called the Pretty Kitties Maid Service. She said she needed pretty and young girls like me, that she had 10 girls now as it was, and she wanted to expand. She mentioned how they get paid $30K. She didn't specify the time length, and how it would be a great opportunity for me to help her with her business. I instantly knew at that point that it certainly wasn't a maid business, and I was in danger. However, I didn't understand just how much danger I was in. I politely declined her offer and told her I liked my job as it was, and that I was satisfied working for my boss. She tried to further convince me by telling me how easy it was and reiterating how much I'd make under her supervision. She mentioned how she had a van for her business and described it to me. I can't exactly remember what she told me, but I do remember how she told me to follow her to her car. She said she'd show me a picture of her van in her car, but her phone was in her hands. I knew for certain I wasn't going anywhere with her or near that car. I declined yet again and said that I was fine right where I was. I said she could show me on her phone instead, but she was hesitant. After which she proceeded to end the conversation and left with the 2 men. A little shaken, I walked back into the restaurant with my cook and told him what I had just experienced. He joked about how I'd have good money if I went with them, because I didn't take the situation as seriously as I should have. I laughed with him. At the end of that night, when the cook's grandmother came to pick us up, I mentioned the weird interaction. A panicked look came over her, and she sat silent, staring at me. I got confused and asked her if everything was okay. That's when I learned the signs of human trafficking. She broke it to me that I was almost trafficked, and I was incredibly lucky I didn't get kidnapped. My stomach dropped, and I started to panic at the realization of just how much danger I was in. Nothing really happened after that. Except for the red binder and the black pen I told you to remember. I went to work the next day, and a customer walked in. Now, normally, in my part of town, not many people like to sit and relax for a while. They're mostly there to just eat and leave, as it wasn't exactly a cafe. Well, I get into my apron and sit this gentleman. He was well dressed, not in a suit and tie, but just nicely dressed. He was alone. I sat him at a single booth and took his order of one single coffee. He had a red binder and black pen with him. I didn't even notice until my cook from the night before reminded me of it. I was so shocked at the fact, and it unsettled me even more that he proceeded to sit there for 3 hours, watching me as I tended to my tables. I kept asking him if he needed anything else, and he asked me if people never just sat and relaxed with coffee. I sort of shrugged and said no, not here. Now, this might come as a surprise to some of you, but servers, believe it or not, do listen in on some of your conversations. I'm lucky I did with this one. I specifically remember him speaking over the phone about finances and how he needed to find another house. He spoke about moving money and how he was going to pay his girls that night. I ran to the back of the kitchen and told me to cook. Thankfully, he came out with me to help deliver some plates in order to throw the guy off. It worked, I think. He ended up leaving not long after that, and I haven't seen or heard anything since. I'll tell you though, I've been much more on guard since then. I use this story as a way to tell others to please be safe and be aware of your surroundings. I didn't think this could happen to me. It can happen to anyone. Be safe and be observant. I want to share my little story. My childhood best friend, Marie, and I were around 11 or 12 years old at the time. Marie's family had their own campsite in a provincial park about 2 hours from our hometown, and would spend the entire summer each year living in their camper out there. This particular summer, I was able to go and stay with them for a week, and we were excited to spend our time adventuring around the forest. On the last night that I was there, we decided we wanted to hurry down to the ice cream shop by the lake before it closed. It was early evening at this point, still pretty bright out, but beginning to lose light. The path we took was down a short slope right next to the main road, with maybe 10 feet of thick brush and trees in between. On the other side was the forest, with more tall, thick brush. So we were walking along, not seeing a single other person on the path in front or behind us. We hear a sudden rustling and snapping of branches, similar to the sound of maybe a deer moving through the woods. I wouldn't have thought anything of it, but then the sound of running footsteps follows. Marie glances back and suddenly grabs my arm, urging me under her breath not to look back. At the same time, the running stops. I don't know why I didn't ignore her and get a look myself. I guess I could sense the very real fear in her voice and chose to listen. We both start to panic, getting that feeling like when you're running up the stairs after turning the basement light off. We pick up speed as much as we can without breaking into a sprint, knowing the ice cream shop is only about a minute's walk away at this point. The path soon breaks, and we are in the parking lot. Suddenly, Marie steers me hard to the left, heading towards the lake and the boat rental, instead of continuing straight to the ice cream shop. And I go along with it silently, understanding ice cream is no longer an interest right now. Marie is clearly panicking at this point. We are both looking around, but it seems whatever scared her is nowhere in sight at this point. Marie walks up to the boat rental and gets us a kayak, and we climb in and begin to paddle out into the middle of the lake. As we paddle, she tells me that there was a man behind us, and that the man had stopped running at us very abruptly upon making eye contact with her. He had been wearing a long black coat with the hood up, despite it being the middle of July, had a terrible smirk on his face, and she swore that as he stopped running, she saw him put something shiny away into his coat. He appeared to have just emerged out of the bushes after we walked past, given the sounds we heard right before he came running onto the path. We reach the center of the lake and stop paddling. I pull out my Nokia brick phone that my parents had, thank God, given me just in case. I handed it to Marie and told her to call her parents to come pick us up. As the phone rings, I see her look out past me to the shore and go pale, lifting a hand to point to what she's seeing. I turned, and there was the man, stalking his way around the path that circled the edge of the lake, staring out at us. We sat in the middle of the lake and watched him do 2 full laps, never looking away from us, before finally disappearing. It took a few tries to get a hold of her family. We were freaking out so badly the whole time, as the sun got lower and lower. We did manage to have someone come with the truck, but by the time we reached the shore, it was pretty dark outside. I don't know what we would have done if we hadn't been able to call for a ride. Looking back, I don't know why we didn't just go up to the ice cream shop, inform an adult there, and ask her parents to come get us then. But it worked out. We got back safe, and we thankfully never saw the man again. When I was 12, maybe a little older, I was waiting for my ride after school one day, when this big white family van pulls up in front of me and asks if I'm waiting for my ride. My family had a van just like this one, so it wasn't suspicious or anything to me, but I was dumb and didn't register that, yeah, I am. And he was asking an obvious question, because here I am sitting outside the school by myself. But I answered anyways, and then he asked what my name was, and I hesitated. But he explained that he was looking for someone, so I gave it. I told him my name was Thea, and he said, "Oh, so it is you. Your mom asked me to come pick you up from school." He then introduces himself as Sam, my mom's nephew. And I had never really met my mom's family, so I was none the wiser. Eager to get home and out of the cold, I didn't question him much, even though I was skeptical. I just jumped in the car, and thinking back on it now, I realize how dumb I was, and how lucky I was to get away. I got in, and we started driving towards the opposite direction of my house. At first, I thought no big deal of it, because there was a route this way to my place, but it was just farther. But soon, we were passing that route too, and out of nowhere, I realized we were on the motorway. Now, all traces of tiredness had left me, and I was on the edge of tears. I asked him if he could please take me home, and that if my mom sent him, then he should know I'm not really allowed to go out after school. But he just kept ignoring me. At this point, I was officially bawling my eyes out, and cars that were passing us on the motorway or standing next to us in traffic were starting to stare. At one point, I was crying so much, he slammed his hands on the steering wheel and started mumbling how this would be easier for both of us if I would just shut up. But now I wasn't thinking straight, and I knew that anything would be better than making it to wherever he was taking me. So the next time the car slowed down, I unlocked the door and jumped out. In all honesty, I wasn't thinking at all, because if I thought about it, I would have chickened out. And for once, I thank God that I didn't. I hit the ground and landed on my left leg. The pain was so bad, but I didn't care, because in my head, anything was better than being in that car. The dude didn't even bat an eye. I feel like in the chaos, I seen him try and grab me. But once I was outside, he just sped away, and the driver, who almost hit me, but stopped just in time, got out and ran towards me. The police were called, and my parents as well. But to this day, I am not allowed to wait outside anywhere, and even before I'm done with whatever I'm doing. My parents will be outside waiting. So I was on the way home from Arby's with a mint chocolate shake. Zoned out for a sec, and almost didn't notice his car. I tried just letting him through, but he insisted I go on ahead. Didn't think much of it, and just continued on walking. He drove on ahead and parked his car near some apartments. He had on a black polo shirt, so I assumed he was just dropping something off for a job or something. As I kept walking, he approached me and offered me a $20 bill. I asked why, but couldn't understand what he said in response. I refused, since I know what's best for me. However, that didn't deter him. He grabbed my waist, and I stepped to the side. He then started pulling me towards his car. I bit his hand so he wouldn't silence me, and made sure to scream as loud as possible to try and attract any bystanders if I could. He managed to get me into his car, and just before he could close it, I stuck my foot through the door to keep it open. I then got out and made myself go limp, since adding dead weight without warning creates sudden resistance and makes it harder for them to grasp you. Due to this quick thinking, I was able to get away unharmed. I quickly booked it and got on the phone with my mom once I was at a safe distance. I made sure to stay on the phone until I got back. After that, I had taken some time to calm down and waited for the cops to get there to get my statement. The officer ended up praising my quick thinking, telling me that I'd luckily done everything right in this situation. Please, guys, take self-defense seriously. I've only ever had a week-long course, and just that alone had managed to save my life. I didn't remember too much from my self-defense course, and only used the basic techniques that I'd remembered, which was making noise, dropping my weight, and checking behind me. Any other actions I'd taken were a result of logic and quick thinking. Chances are, if I'd gotten more self-defense training, it likely wouldn't have been as close of a call as it was. Also, never accept money from strangers. While there are good Samaritans, there are also people who don't have your best interest in mind. If you do think they have good intentions, make sure to double check by asking why they're offering you money. If you don't get a good legitimate reason, then make sure you refuse. If you refuse and they still persist, then get away immediately.